When I first opened the bedroom door, I thought I was walking into the same life I had always known. I thought I would see my daughter asleep, the house quiet, the night like any other. Instead, I saw them there, together, where no one should be together. My legs felt like water. For one strange moment I smiled. I did not know whether to scream or to cry. So I stood very still, breathed and listened to my heart beating like a small frightened drum. I remember the way the moonlight fell on the sheets. I remember the small sound the window made when the wind brushed it. I remember how my mind tried to make sense of something that had no sense left. Everything in me broke a little, but then something else took hold, a quiet, sharp resolve. I did not want revenge that would break me more. I wanted to protect my daughter and to get the man out of our lives. And so, I left the room without a word. I closed the door like closing a wound. My name is Lilaa. I am 62 years old. I have lived in this house for most of my life. My daughter's name is Aisha. She is 29. She was always my bright child. She loved to sing in the kitchen and make tea for the neighbors. After her father died, Aisha married a man who promised to love her and to stay. He left after 2 years. It was a hard time for both of us. In time because we were lonely and because life kept moving. I married again. His name was Kamran. He was kind at first. He had a soft voice and a steady hand. I thought he would be my partner in the quiet years. I thought he would be someone to share rice and stories with. Aisha welcomed him warmly. She laughs easily still, but sometimes I saw the old sadness cross her face. I thought it was healing. Our small house felt whole again for a while. We shared meals, prayers, and small jokes. I knit and she painted. We went to the market together. We held one another when the nights felt too cold. Kamran was often around. He fixed things and told stories about faraway places. He made me feel safe for a while. I admit I let myself trust him. I wanted to believe in kindness again. At first, it was nothing. Or at least, that's what I told myself. A cup missing from the shelf. A small lie about where he had gone. The smell of perfume that wasn't mine. Little things, small as raindrops. But together they made a storm I could almost hear building. Kamran had started spending more time at home during the day. He said business was slow, and I didn't question him. We were not rich, but we had enough to live simply. I thought maybe he wanted to help more. Maybe he was trying to show care. But something about the way he moved changed. He became quieter, almost watchful. Sometimes when I entered a room, he would lower his voice or turn away, pretending to look for something on his phone. Aisha changed too, though I didn't notice it all at once. She used to hum in the mornings when making tea. But now the house woke up in silence. She would eat her breakfast quickly and go straight to her room. When I knocked, she'd say, "I'm tired, Amma. I just need rest." At first, I thought it was work. Her job at the design shop could be stressful. Long hours, difficult clients. But tiredness doesn't make you flinch when someone calls your name. It doesn't make you look away when your mother tries to meet your eyes. I began to sense something else. Not anger, not fear, but shame. It floated around her like a quiet fog. When Kamran entered the room, she would stiffen slightly, or look down at her phone as if trying to disappear. Sometimes I'd find her sitting outside in the cold evening, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, staring at nothing. I'd ask, "Aisha, what's wrong?" And she'd smile, that small, brittle smile that hides more than it shows. The nights grew longer. I'd hear footsteps after midnight, a door closing softly. Once I thought I heard voices, low, hushed tones, and then a silence too sharp to be natural. I told myself maybe Kamran was watching TV, maybe Aisha had come for water. But I couldn't sleep after that. My heart wouldn't let me. One evening, I was folding clothes when I found a shirt that wasn't mine. The fabric was still warm from ironing, but I didn't remember doing it. The scent was faint but strange. Not the soap I used. I held it up to the light, and for a moment I felt dizzy. as if the room had tilted slightly. When I asked Kamran about it later, he laughed, easy and practiced. "Oh, that? I was helping Aisha fix the button. You know how she can't sew." He kissed my forehead, like a man comforting a child, and walked away before I could say another word. But that night, when I lay in bed, I felt the weight of that kiss. It didn't feel like love. It felt like guilt trying to disguise itself as affection. And yet, I said nothing. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fear of breaking something I had waited years to build. I had lost once, my first husband, and I couldn't bear to lose again, so I convinced myself that my doubts were cruel, that good wives don't imagine shadows where there's light. But deep down, I knew. Every time I looked at them, my heart whispered, "Something is wrong." I tried to hold on to normalcy, as if pretending would keep the cracks from showing. In the mornings, I made parathas like always, placed 3 plates on the table, and waited for laughter to fill the space. But silence sat with us instead. Kamran scrolled through his phone. Aisha looked anywhere but at him, and I stirred my tea until it went cold. One afternoon, I found Kamran sitting in the living room with Aisha. They were talking quietly. When they saw me, the conversation stopped mid-sentence. I smiled and said, "You both look so serious. What's going on?" Kamran quickly said, "Just bills, Lilaa. Nothing important." Aisha gave a small nod, her face pale. That moment stayed with me. Bills don't make a daughter look like she wants to run out of her own home. I began to watch more closely, not with suspicion, but with sorrow. When Kamran spoke to her, I noticed the way his eyes lingered. When Aisha answered, her tone carried the softness of someone who has lost control over her own comfort. Once I caught her arm trembling as she reached for her cup. I wanted to take her hand, to ask what was wrong, but fear kept my mouth shut. Fear that the truth might be something I wasn't ready to hear. I started asking small questions, hoping she'd open up. "How was work today?" She'd shrug. "Fine, Amma. Are you happy here?" "I'm just tired, Amma. I'll be okay." Each time her answers became shorter, her eyes emptier. I realized she was building a wall between us, one polite smile at a time. At night, I sat by her door, listening to the faint hum of her ceiling fan, wondering if she was asleep or crying quietly. Sometimes, I would pray, not for answers, but for courage. Courage to face whatever truth waited in the silence. Kamran began to stay up late saying he had paperwork. I'd hear him moving around the kitchen, opening drawers, whispering on the phone. Once when I walked in unexpectedly, he jumped slightly and smiled too quickly. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Just making tea." But the stove was cold. The kettle was dry. The tension in the house became something you could touch. Doors closed softly but meaningfully. Conversations ended before they began. Even the air felt heavy, thick with unspoken words. One night I decided to speak. Aisha was sitting in her room, her hands clasped together. I sat beside her and said, "My child, if there's something you want to tell me, you can. I won't be angry." Her eyes filled with tears immediately. She turned away and whispered, "Not now, Amma. Please." Her voice broke on that last word. I wanted to hold her, to demand the truth, but I stopped myself. If she wasn't ready, forcing her would only make the wound deeper. That night, I stayed awake again. The wind pushed against the windows. Somewhere a gate creaked. I felt trapped inside my own house, surrounded by people I loved but couldn't reach. A few days later, a small thing changed everything. I went to Aisha's room to leave folded laundry. Her phone buzzed on the bed. I didn't mean to look. I never do. But the screen lit up with a name that froze my breath. Kamran. It wasn't just a message. It was the way the words glowed in that dim room. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. My body already knew. That night, I walked through the dark hallways like a ghost in my own home. And for the first time, I admitted the truth I had been hiding from myself. My home was no longer mine, and the two people I loved most were keeping a secret that could tear us apart. That night, the air felt wrong. You know how sometimes you can sense when something is about to happen? Even before it does, the world goes quiet in a strange way. The clock ticks louder. Even your own breath sounds like thunder. It was past midnight when I heard it again. The sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, careful, like someone trying not to wake me. At first, I thought maybe Aisha was thirsty. She often went for water when she couldn't sleep. But then I heard another sound, a whisper, then silence, then a faint laugh that did not belong in that hour. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I stepped out of bed, my shawl around my shoulders, and followed the faint glow of light from under the door down the hall. I remember the chill of the floor beneath my feet. I remember my own heartbeat, fast and heavy in my ears. And then I saw it. The door of my own bedroom slightly open, light spilling through the crack. In that moment, everything inside me stopped. My hand reached for the handle, but it shook so much I had to hold it with both hands. When I pushed the door open, the world I knew ended quietly, without sound, without a scream, just silence, like the air had been cut in half. What I saw is not something I will describe, not because I have forgotten it, I never will, but because some memories should stay wordless. They belong to the heart, not to the tongue. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I think my body forgot how. I just stood there, watching everything I had built. My marriage, my family, my trust, crumble in a single heartbeat. For a long time, none of us moved. They froze. I froze. Even the shadows seemed to stop breathing. Then I turned away, slowly, carefully. I closed the door behind me as gently as if I were putting a child to sleep. When I reached the kitchen, I sat down at the table. My hands were cold. My heart was burning. I stared at the old teacups we used to share and thought of how easily love can turn into something else. Something sharp, something cruel. The night felt endless. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to run out of the house. But another voice spoke inside me, low and steady. Don't destroy yourself for their sin. So I sat there until morning. I listened to the call of the first azan, the prayer that signals dawn. The world outside was beginning to forgive the night, but I knew I would not forgive so easily. By the time the sun rose, I had made a decision. I would not confront them in rage. I would not give them the drama they might expect. I would find the truth properly, and then I would take my life back, piece by piece. After that night, I stopped living. Or maybe I should say, I started pretending to live. I woke up every morning, cooked breakfast, smiled when my husband walked into the kitchen, even asked if he wanted more tea. He thought my silence was forgiveness. He didn't know it was preparation. Each word I spoke, each step I took, was deliberate. I was no longer the woman who believed love could fix everything. I had become someone else. Quieter, sharper, patient like water that carves stone. I began to observe. I noticed how often he left the house when I wasn't around, how quickly he turned his phone face down whenever someone called, and how my daughter, Aisha, avoided my eyes. Her once bright laughter now replaced by nervous silence. At night, I would sit alone at the kitchen table with my diary. It was an old leather book, worn at the corners. I started writing down everything. Dates, words, movements, feelings. Not out of revenge, but to understand. Because the mind can play tricks when the heart is hurt. I needed to know if what I'd seen was real, or if my grief had invented it. Day after day, the truth began to form, quietly between the lines of my notes. And it was real, painfully real. One afternoon, when both of them were out, I opened his drawer, not because I wanted to invade his privacy, but because privacy dies the day trust is broken. I found small clues, a receipt from a hotel, a bracelet that wasn't mine, a photograph that was never meant for me to see. That was enough. Enough to tell me I had not imagined anything. But I didn't cry this time. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed. The same bed that once felt like home. And whispered to myself, "You've done nothing wrong. You've been loyal, kind, patient. Now it's time to protect your own peace." That night, I prayed long after the lights went out. Not for punishment or revenge. I prayed for clarity, for the strength to face what I already knew. Because sometimes, truth is heavier than lies. In the following days, I reached out to an old friend, Sarah, someone who had known me since childhood. I told her everything, in fragments at first, then all at once. She didn't interrupt. She just listened. And when I finished, she placed her hand over mine and said softly, "Don't destroy yourself in his mess. Walk out clean. You don't need to prove what he's done. You just need to know it." Her words became my plan. I went to a lawyer the next morning. Quietly. Without telling anyone. We discussed the papers, the property, the future. It was frightening. But for the first time in months, I felt control. I was finally steering my own story again. When I came home that evening, the house felt smaller. Walls I had decorated with love now looked like witnesses to my pain. Still, I smiled when he greeted me, just as I had done every day. But this time, the smile was not for him. It was for myself, for the woman who had finally stopped running from her own truth. It happened on a Sunday morning. The house was quiet. Aisha was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a magazine. He was at the dining table, sipping his coffee, the same man who had once promised to protect us both. I stood there for a moment, watching the steam rise from his cup. Strange how something so ordinary can exist beside so much pain. Then I spoke, my voice calm, steady, almost gentle. "I know everything," I said. Just those 3 words. He looked up, confused at first, then cautious. "What are you talking about?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply placed the photograph on the table in front of him. His hand froze midair. The color drained from his face. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the wall clock. "I don't need explanations," I continued. "I don't want lies. I just want you to leave." He tried to speak. Words stumbled out, excuses wrapped in guilt. But I shook my head. "Please," I said quietly. "You've done enough. Don't make it worse with words." Aisha looked up then. Her eyes were wet, trembling. I turned to her and said softly, "I love you. You don't have to explain anything right now. Just find your way. But this house will no longer be a shelter for lies." There was no shouting, no chaos, just stillness, like the pause between thunder and rain. He gathered a few things in silence. When the door finally closed behind him, I stood there for a long time, staring at the space he left behind. The room felt different, lighter, emptier, but also freer. Then I walked to my daughter. She couldn't meet my eyes. I sat beside her, gently held her hand and said, "We can't undo what's been done, but we can start again. I will not punish you, Aisha. I will help you heal. But you must promise me one thing. Never let anyone make you forget your worth." She broke down then, tears flowing freely. For the first time in months, we held each other not as strangers bound by guilt, but as mother and daughter, bound by pain and hope. In the following weeks, I finalized the separation quietly. No public drama, no gossip, no bitterness. I sold a few things, moved into a smaller house, and began rebuilding our lives one quiet morning at a time. There were days when I missed the comfort of routine, even the sound of his voice, because heartbreak is strange like that. But then I would remind myself, peace is worth more than familiarity. Now, when I sit by the window with my cup of tea, I sometimes think of that day, the calm confrontation that ended years of deception, and I realize that victory doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it's just the silence that follows truth. Clean, still, and final. The first months after he left were the hardest, not because of loneliness. I had lived with loneliness even when the house was full. But because silence has a way of echoing what we try to forget. Each morning I would wake up early, just before dawn. The house was small now, the walls bare, but the air felt lighter. I would open the window, let the morning light spill in, and breathe. It was strange how peace could hurt at first. I wasn't used to it. My daughter, Aisha, had moved to stay with an aunt for a while. She needed space and I didn't stop her. Some distances are not made of anger. They are made of healing. We spoke every few days. Short calls, cautious words. But underneath them, I could feel her guilt slowly turning into understanding. I spent my days teaching at a small community school nearby. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me purpose. Children have a way of mending broken hearts. They laugh without reason, forgive without hesitation, and remind you that life still has gentle corners. In the evenings, I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, listening to the sounds of the city. Distant traffic, a baby crying, the soft hum of life continuing. For the first time, I began to feel grateful for the ordinary. I learned to live with myself again. I rearranged the furniture, painted the walls a pale cream, bought a few new plants. Every small change felt like reclaiming a piece of my identity that I had lost in someone else's shadow. One day, while leaving the school, I met someone. His name was Kareem. He was helping the community center with repairs. Quiet, polite, a man whose kindness didn't need to be announced. He smiled when I thanked him for fixing the classroom window, and there was something familiar in that smile. Not romance, not spark, just peace. At first, we only talked in passing about the weather, the children, the city. But over time, our conversations began to stretch longer. He told me about his late wife, how he had learned to cook after she passed, and how he still kept her favorite teacup by the stove. There was no pity in his voice, no attempt to impress, just honesty. It was strange to realize that I wasn't afraid to talk anymore. With him, I didn't have to pretend to be strong. I could be quiet, thoughtful, even uncertain, and that was enough. Weeks turned into months. We met often at the school, then sometimes outside. A walk through the park, a shared cup of coffee. It wasn't love at first sight. It was love that arrived slowly, respectfully, like someone knocking gently and waiting to be invited in. When Aisha came back to visit one weekend, she noticed the change in me before I even spoke. "You look lighter," she said with a small smile. I laughed softly. Maybe I finally remembered how to breathe. She hugged me then tightly. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered. And that was all we needed. No long apologies, no explanations, just forgiveness, quiet and complete. Over time, Kareem became a steady presence in both our lives. He never tried to replace anyone. He simply fit where kindness was missing. When he joined us for dinner for the first time, he brought a box of sweets and said, "I don't come empty-handed. My mother taught me better than that." Even Aisha smiled, genuinely this time. I could feel the walls that had once been heavy with sorrow slowly begin to breathe again. Laughter returned, softly at first, then stronger. It took almost 2 years before I realized I had stopped counting the pain. Grief has a strange habit. It becomes quieter with time, until one day you look back and it feels like a story you once knew, not a wound you still carry. One evening, I sat in the small garden behind our house, the same one Kareem helped me plant. The air smelled of jasmine, and the sky was turning orange with sunset. Aisha was visiting again, now engaged to a kind young man who treated her gently. I watched her laugh with Kareem as they set the table outside, and I felt something warm spread through my chest. Not pride, not joy alone, but peace. I thought about the woman I used to be. Frightened, broken, standing in the kitchen that night holding her own silence like a shield. And I thought of who I was now. Not perfect, not unscarred, but whole. When Kareem came over and sat beside me, he looked at me for a long moment before saying softly, "You've been through storms most people wouldn't survive. But look at you. You built a garden out of the ruins." I smiled. "I had help," he chuckled. "Maybe, but it was your heart that decided to bloom again." The call to prayer echoed from the nearby mosque, gentle and steady. We both fell silent, listening. And in that quiet moment, I understood something. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without pain. Later that night, when everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone by the window. The same habit I'd never quite given up. The city lights shimmered in the distance. The same world that had once broken me was now holding me softly in its arms. I picked up my diary, the one I had once filled with tears and confusion, and turned to a blank page. For the first time, I wrote without shaking hands. Life did not end that night. It began again. Slower, quieter, wiser. Forgiveness did not erase what happened. It simply freed me from carrying it forever. And love, the right kind of love, doesn't demand. It understands. When I closed the book, I felt something inside me settle. Not triumph, not relief, just peace. Because in the end, the greatest revenge against pain is not bitterness. It is happiness. It is waking up each day knowing you survived and still found beauty waiting for you. And so, as I turned off the lamp and whispered my prayers, I realized I was no longer the woman who had been left behind. I was the woman who learned how to begin again. It's been many years since that chapter of my life closed. Sometimes when I look in the mirror, I hardly recognize the woman staring back. There are more lines around my eyes now, more gray in my hair. But there's also peace in my heart, and that, I've learned, is worth more than beauty ever was. People often ask me how I forgave, how I managed to move forward after what happened. The truth is, forgiveness didn't come all at once. It came slowly, like morning light creeping through the curtains after a long night. At first, I forgave for the sake of my daughter, then for my own heart, because holding on to anger only kept me tied to the pain that had already left. Sometimes I still think of my second husband, not with hatred, not even with sadness, just understanding. He was a man who never learned how to value peace, who mistook control for love. And I was a woman who once believed that silence could save everything. We were both wrong. Life has a way of teaching you in whispers first, then storms. And when the storms finally pass, you see what was worth keeping and what needed to go. Now my mornings are quiet again. I wake up beside Kareem, the soft rhythm of his breathing reminding me that kindness can exist even after chaos. We share breakfast in the garden. Tea, eggs, laughter, nothing grand, but it feels sacred. Aisha visits often with her husband and children. The house fills with the sound of small footsteps and giggles, the scent of food and rain, and I can't help but smile. It's strange. I once thought my home was destroyed forever, but maybe it just needed to be rebuilt with truth instead of fear. Sometimes I sit with my grandchildren and tell them stories. Not the painful ones. Those belong to another time. I tell them stories about strength, patience, and kindness. I tell them how, sometimes, losing everything isn't the end. It's the beginning of something gentler. Because life, I've learned, doesn't always give us the story we want, but it always gives us the choice to write the next chapter differently. If you're listening to me now, if you're someone sitting in the quiet of your own heartbreak, I want you to know this. You are stronger than the storm that broke you. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to rebuild. And you are allowed to find joy again, even if it arrives in small trembling moments at first. Don't rush your healing. Don't demand answers before your heart is ready. Just breathe. One day you'll wake up and realize that the ache has softened, that you can think about what happened without feeling the weight of it pressing on your chest. And when that day comes, you'll smile, not because the pain is gone, but because you survived it. Forgive not to set them free, but to set yourself free. Walk away, not in anger, but in dignity, because there is no revenge greater than peace, no justice deeper than joy. I often look back at that woman sitting in the dark kitchen years ago, broken, silent, certain her life was over. If I could speak to her now, I would hold her face in my hands and whisper, "You will not just survive this. You will bloom again. And one day, your story will become someone else's light." Then I would tell her to have faith, because even the smallest seed grows in darkness before it reaches the sun. And that is how I live now, quietly, gratefully, with open hands and a peaceful heart. Every scar on my soul has turned into a lesson. Every tear became a seed. And every sunrise reminds me that beginnings are often disguised as endings. So, if you ever find yourself standing at the edge of your life, afraid of what comes next, remember my story. Remember that healing is not forgetting. It is learning to live again, with hope, with softness, with strength. Because no matter what the world takes from you, if you still have kindness left in your heart, you have everything you need to begin again. The story we have told is fictional, but is based on some real events. The names and places have been changed to protect the identity of those involved. We're not sharing this to pass judgment, but in the hope that someone listens and pauses to think, how many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I'm so curious. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to stay silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face it all to get your voice back? I want to know what you think, because every story is a candle that can light the way for someone else. God always blesses.